My name is Jimmy. I'm a 24-year-old student, and this is my story. The drive home was long and foreboding. My family reunion had been a joyous occasion filled with laughter, food, and the warmth of shared stories. As I pulled out of my aunt's driveway, the clock on the dashboard blinked 11:58 p.m. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the deserted highway ahead. I'd been driving for hours, my eyelids heavy with fatigue, each blink a battle to stay awake. The familiar landmarks that lined the road seemed twisted and distorted in the darkness. Each passing mile seemed to stretch into an eternity, the road an endless abyss. The hum of my car engine was the only sound, a haunting lullaby in the silence. The road seemed to unwind before me like an endless black ribbon leading into the unknown. I knew this route like the back of my hand, having traveled it countless times since childhood, yet under the cloak of night it felt unfamiliar and unsettling, as if the road itself had changed. The once familiar surroundings were now cloaked in shadows, taking on an eerie and ominous presence, whispering secrets of the night. The trees that lined the roadside, once comforting in their familiarity, now seemed to reach out towards the car with long, gnarled fingers. Their silhouettes danced menacingly in the headlights' beams. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, my every move scrutinized by unseen eyes. The further I drove, the more isolated I felt. The occasional passing car, which would have been a comforting reminder of civilization just moments before, now only served to heighten my sense of unease. Each vehicle that roared past felt like a missed opportunity for connection, a fleeting chance to break free from the growing isolation that pressed in on me. The silence inside the car was deafening. The radio, which I had turned on earlier for company, now seemed to amplify the stillness rather than break it. Every rustle of leaves outside the window, every creak of the car's interior felt amplified, sending shivers down my spine. My eyelids felt heavy as lead. The monotonous drone of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the tires on asphalt were hypnotic. Despite my best efforts to stay alert, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. It was a visceral sensation, a physical manifestation of my mental and emotional fatigue. I knew I should pull over, find a safe place to rest. Logic dictated that driving in my condition was dangerous, but the thought of stopping, of making myself vulnerable in this desolate stretch of road, filled me with a primal fear that I couldn't ignore. The world outside the windshield blurred, the lines between reality and fatigue-induced hallucinations becoming increasingly indistinct. I rubbed my eyes furiously, trying to fight off the encroaching drowsiness, but the more I struggled, the stronger the urge to sleep became, pulling me deeper into its comforting embrace. I finally gave in to the overwhelming urge to rest. Pulling off onto the shoulder, I assured myself it would just be for a few minutes, just enough to clear my head. The moment the engine cut off, the silence of the night pressed in, heavy and absolute. I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes, and let the darkness envelop me. The world outside faded away, replaced by a dizzying kaleidoscope of fragmented images and half-formed thoughts. Time lost all meaning as I drifted in and out of a restless, dreamless sleep. I was jolted awake by a scratching sound. It was faint, barely audible, but it sent a chill down my spine. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to identify the source of the noise. It seemed to be coming from the roof of the car directly above my head. I held my breath, listening intently. The scratching continued, sporadic and irregular, like the claws of some small animal trying to gain purchase on the car's metal exterior. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of my drowsiness, jolting me fully awake. I dared not move a muscle, terrified of drawing attention to myself. The scratching stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The silence that followed was even more unnerving, pregnant with unseen menace. I could hear my own pulse throbbing in my ears, a frantic rhythm against the backdrop of the night. The silence stretched on, each second an eternity. I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths, trying to calm my racing heart. The rational part of my mind struggled to explain away the scratching, attributing it to the wind or a stray branch brushing against the car. But deep down, a primal instinct screamed at me that something was wrong, terribly wrong. Just as I thought it was safe to relax, I saw it, a flicker of movement in the rear-view mirror. My blood ran cold. There, in the distance, a pair of eyes glowed in the darkness, reflecting the faint light from my taillights. They were too high off the ground to belong to an animal. They stared back at me, unwavering, filled with a malevolence that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't tear my gaze away, mesmerized by the sheer intensity of their stare. The eyes seemed to burn into me, seeing right through the metal and glass of the car, penetrating my very soul. The eyes blinked, and for a fleeting moment I saw the outline of a face. It was gaunt and pale, with sharp, angular features that seemed etched in shadow. The lips were pulled back in a grotesque parody of a smile, revealing teeth that gleamed unnaturally white in the darkness. Panic surged through me, overriding the paralysis that had gripped me moments before. I fumbled for the keys in the ignition, my hands trembling uncontrollably. The engine roared to life, breaking the silence with a violence that startled me. I slammed the car into gear and sped off into the night, leaving the glowing eyes and the grotesque face behind me. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, propelling me forward. I didn't dare look back, terrified of what I might see. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, a dark and treacherous tunnel with no end in sight. The speedometer needle climbed steadily as I pushed the car to its limits, desperate to outrun the terror that clung to me like a shroud. The memory of the eyes in the mirror haunted me, their malevolent gaze burned into my mind. The image of the grinning face, leering and predatory, fueled my flight, urging me onward. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, my entire body tense with fear and adrenaline. As I rounded a bend in the road, my headlights illuminated a car pulled off to the side. Its hazard lights blinked feebly, casting an eerie orange glow on the surrounding trees. Relief washed over me for a brief moment. Another human being, a potential source of help in this desolate landscape. I slowed down, cautiously approaching the stranded vehicle. As I got closer, I noticed that the driver's side door was wide open. The interior light cast long, distorted shadows that danced on the asphalt. Hesitation gnawed at the edges of my fear. The events of the last hour whispered warnings in the back of my mind. Despite my better judgment, I couldn't bring myself to simply drive past. Someone might be hurt, in desperate need of assistance. I pulled up behind the car, leaving my headlights on to illuminate the scene. The figure of a man was slumped over the steering wheel. Taking a deep breath, I cautiously approached the open door, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Are you all right? Can I help you?" There was no response. The only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves in the night breeze. I leaned closer, peering into the car. The man was still slumped over the steering wheel, his face hidden from view. As I reached out to touch his shoulder, he slowly raised his head. My blood ran cold. It was the face from the rearview mirror. The same gaunt features, the same grotesque smile, the same eyes that seemed to burn with an inner fire. He lunged for me, his hand shooting out to grab my arm. I recoiled instinctively, stumbling backward in terror. He let out a guttural roar, a primal sound that seemed to echo through the empty night. I didn't hesitate. Spinning on my heel, I ran back to my car, the sound of his enraged screams echoing in my ears. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my car. Slamming the door shut, I fumbled for the lock, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the keys. As I sped away, I could see the man in my rearview mirror, his silhouette illuminated by the red glow of my taillights. He stood there, watching me go, his face a mask of rage and disappointment. The events of that night have stayed with me, a chilling reminder of the importance of trusting my instincts. I should have listened to that voice in the back of my mind, the one that told me to keep driving when I saw the car on the side of the road. That night, I learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes the greatest danger is the one we convince ourselves isn't real. Sometimes the safest course of action is to trust our gut, even when it defies logic and reason. And sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones we imagine lurking in the shadows, but the ones who walk among us in broad daylight.